"You're becoming dead weight, Dad." My daughter's words landed harder than I expected. I was sitting across from her at a restaurant in Columbus, Ohio, with a half-finished steak in front of me and my grandson coloring a picture beside her. Nobody spoke for several seconds. My son-in-law, Mark, looked down at his plate. My daughter, Jessica, didn't. She held my eyes. "You know what I mean," she said. I slowly put down my fork. "No, actually, I don't," she sighed. "Dad, please don't make this difficult." I asked a question. "You need help with everything now." "That isn't true. You fell twice this year." "I fell once." "Twice. The second time I slipped on your front steps. That still counts." I looked at Mark. He didn't meet my eyes. Jessica leaned forward. "We have 2 kids. Mark works long hours. I work too. We can't keep rearranging our lives every time you need something." I felt my jaw tighten. "I've asked you for help 3 times. Exactly. 3 times in 6 months. And that's normal to you." "No," I said. "It's not." She folded her arms. I looked at my daughter. I had raised her alone after her mother died. I had been 51 when cancer took my wife. Jessica was 24. She had already moved out by then, but grief had brought her home almost every night. I remembered sitting with her in the kitchen after the funeral. She had put her head on my shoulder and said, "It's just you and me now, Dad." I had believed her. Maybe that was why those words at dinner hurt more than anything else. Because I remembered the version of my daughter who once thought I was the safest person in the world. Now she seemed to think I was a responsibility. "I can arrange for someone else to help me," I said. Jessica shook her head. "That isn't the point." "Then what is?" She hesitated. Then she said, "The point is that you don't seem to understand that things have changed." "What changed?" "We did." She pointed between us. "Our lives. You have children." "I understand that." "No, Dad, you don't." Her voice became quieter. "You still think you're the father who takes care of everyone." I said nothing, she continued. "You're not." I stared at her. Then she said it. "You're becoming dead weight." My grandson stopped coloring. Mark finally looked up. "Jess." "What?" "You shouldn't say that. She needs to hear it." I looked at my grandson. His little face had gone still. I smiled at him. "Finish your picture, buddy." He looked at his mother, then back at me. I stood up. "I think I've had enough." Jessica stared at me. "Dad, no." I reached for my coat. "I'm going home." Mark stood. "I'll drive you." "I can drive. You shouldn't drive right now." I looked at him. "I've had 1 glass of wine." "Still." I smiled. "Don't worry, I'll call a taxi." Outside, the evening was cold. I stood under the restaurant's awning and waited. My phone vibrated. A message from Jessica. "I'm sorry you took it that way, but we need boundaries." I looked at the screen. Then I put the phone in my pocket. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was angry. Because for the first time I started asking myself a question I had avoided for years. What would happen if I stopped making my children's lives easier? And by sunrise, I had an answer. It was one decision Jessica never expected. My name is Robert Hayes. I was 67 when my daughter called me dead weight. I had spent most of my adult life believing that being a good father meant being useful. That belief started when I was young. My own father had left when I was 12. He didn't die. He simply left. One day he was there. The next he wasn't. My mother worked 2 jobs. There was never enough money. I learned early that depending on people was dangerous. So when I became a father, I promised myself that my daughter would never feel that uncertainty. Jessica would always have someone. When she needed money for college, I worked weekends. When her first car broke down, I paid for repairs. When she got married, I contributed to the wedding. When she and Mark bought their first house, I helped with the down payment. When they had children, I became the grandfather who was always available. School pickups, doctor appointments, emergency babysitting, furniture assembly, weekend projects if they called. I answered that was my role, at least I thought it was. After my wife died, that role became even more important. The house felt enormous without her. Jess had her own family, but she still called regularly. sometimes just to talk, sometimes because she needed something, and I was always there. Then I started slowing down, not dramatically, just naturally. My knees hurt more, my eyesight wasn't as good at night. I stopped climbing ladders. I retired from the manufacturing company, where I had worked for 38 years. I expected retirement to feel like freedom. Instead, I discovered something nobody had warned me about. People start treating you differently when you stop producing. At work, I had been responsible, reliable, useful. At home, I was just Robert, an older man living alone. After my first fall, Jessica insisted I install handrails in the bathroom. I agreed. After the second, she started talking about assisted living. I laughed. She didn't. Dad, you're not 25 anymore. I know. You need to think realistically. I am. She looked around my house. You shouldn't be living alone. I had heard that sentence so many times that eventually I stopped responding. But then she started asking different questions. How much are you paying in property taxes? How much do you have in savings? Did Mom leave you anything? What happens to the house if something happens to you? I didn't think much of it. She was my daughter. She was worried. At least that was what I told myself. At 6:12 the next morning, I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table. The house was silent. For 40 years, that kitchen had been the center of my family. My wife used to make pancakes there on Sundays. Jessica had done homework at that table. My grandchildren had once built cardboard castles across the floor. Now it was just me. I opened my laptop. I looked at my bank accounts, my retirement savings, my investment account, my home equity. Then I looked at the monthly transfers I had been sending to Jessica and Mark, their mortgage contribution, their children's extracurricular fees, the credit card balance I had quietly been helping with, a monthly amount for groceries, a vacation fund I had once started for the grandchildren. I added everything. My calculator displayed $4,860 per month. I stared at the number, almost $5,000 every month. And the strange thing was, I had never thought of it as support. I had thought of it as family. But the moment Jessica called me dead weight, something changed. If I was a burden to them, I would stop being a burden. Completely. I picked up my phone. I called my financial advisor. Michael? Yes, Robert? I need to make some changes. What kind? I want every recurring transfer to my daughter and son-in-law stopped. There was a pause. Every one? Yes. Are you sure? I looked around my kitchen. Yes. And the trust you've been contributing to for your grandchildren? I hesitated. No. Leave that for the kids. For the kids. That distinction mattered. I wasn't punishing my grandchildren. I wasn't taking away something they had nothing to do with. I was simply removing myself from the financial system my daughter had built around me. Then, I called my lawyer. I had another decision to make. My house was worth nearly $700,000. Jessica had mentioned more than once that the house would eventually belong to her. Mark had even joked about converting the basement into an apartment. I had always laughed. That morning, I didn't. Mr. Collins, I said, yes, I want to review my estate plan. What happened? My daughter thinks I'm dead weight. He was silent then. And what do you think? I looked at the family photographs on the wall. I think she's about to discover what that dead weight was carrying. Jessica called me around 9. Dad, morning. Are you okay? Yes. You left really upset last night. I was tired. Can we talk? Sure. She sounded relieved. I've been thinking. So have I. She laughed nervously. I want you to understand that I didn't mean that literally. You called me dead weight. I was frustrated. I know we're under a lot of pressure. I know our mortgage went up. I know daycare costs are insane. I know. She paused. Can you still help with the payment this month? There it was. The same sentence, the same expectation. I looked at the spreadsheet on my laptop. No. Silence. What? No. Dad, I really need you to do it this month. I won't. But you always do. I know. Then why not? I took a breath. Because you told me I'm dead weight, that isn't fair. You were honest last night. I was angry. So was I. She became irritated. Dad, you're making one stupid comment into some huge decision. No. I looked through the window. I'm making a decision based on many years of decisions. What does that mean? It means I'm no longer paying your bills. She didn't speak. Then she laughed. Not because it was funny, because she thought I was bluffing. You're serious? Yes. Dad, come on. No, fine. We'll figure it out. I hope you do. She hung up. I put the phone down. My hands were shaking, not from regret, from the strange feeling of finally saying no. 3 days later, Jessica called again. Dad, the mortgage payment is due, I know. So what? Are you sending your part? No. Dad, I've already explained. You can't just stop. I can. You made an agreement. No. I thought you said you'd help us until things got easier. I did. They haven't gotten easier. That isn't my responsibility. She went silent. The sentence surprised both of us. I had never said anything like that to her. I can't believe you're doing this, I answered quietly. I can't believe you think I'm obligated to. We hung up. That evening, I looked through old paperwork. There was something I hadn't examined in years. A small business account I had opened after my wife's death. It had been intended for a woodworking business I never started. I had put money into it, then forgotten about it. There was almost $120,000 left. I smiled. Then I knew exactly what I wanted to do. The next morning, I called Michael again. Do you remember the account we talked about years ago? Yes, I want to use some of it. For what, a new place? He laughed. You finally buying that lake cabin? No, I smiled. I'm buying myself a future. I didn't sell the house immediately. Instead, I hired an agent to give me an honest valuation. The number came back at $720,000. I looked at it. Then I looked at Jessica's messages. She had sent 3 that day. Can we talk? Then, I think you're overreacting. Then, please don't do anything with the house until we figure this out. I stared at that final message. I hadn't told her I was considering selling. How did she know? I called my lawyer. Did you tell my daughter anything about my plans? No. Are you sure? Absolutely. I hung up. Then I called my realtor. Put the house on the market. The next morning, the listing went live. Within 24 hours, Jessica knew. She drove to my house. She didn't knock. She used her key. Dad, I walked into the hallway. What happened? You listed the house. Yes, you can't do that. Why not? Because this is our family home. I looked at her. No, she stopped. It is my home. She looked stunned, but you know what I mean. I do. You can't sell it without talking to me. I can. What are you going to do with the money? I said nothing. She stared at me, then her face changed. Dad. What? You're not planning to spend it. I might. On what? My life. She laughed bitterly. Your life? Yes. You've lost it. I smiled. No, Jessica. I've finally found it. The biggest mistake my daughter made was assuming that because I was old, I was finished. She didn't know that after my wife died, I had quietly built a second career. For 15 years, I had invested money conservatively, digging funds, municipal bonds, real estate. Nothing exciting, nothing dangerous. I had never told my children exactly how much I had. Not because I was hiding money, because I didn't think they needed to know. My total net worth was considerably higher than Jessica believed. Even after selling the house, I would have enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. I didn't need my daughter's help. I didn't need her house. And I certainly didn't need her permission. What I needed was something I had never allowed myself to have. Choice. So I chose a small house near the mountains in western North Carolina. Nothing luxurious. 2 bedrooms, a porch, a workshop, a view of the trees. I put down a deposit. When Jessica found out, she was furious. You're moving away? Yes. Why? Because I want to. You're leaving your grandchildren. No, I won't have them see you as much. I'll visit. You're making this impossible. No. I shook my head. You are. She stared at me. What does that mean? It means you told me I was dead weight. She looked away, and instead of showing you that I could carry myself, I decided to stop carrying you. The house sold in 12 days. The buyers were a young couple with a little girl. When they came to sign the final papers, the husband shook my hand. "Thank you for selling it to us," I smiled. "I think you'll like it." The little girl ran through the living room. She stopped beside the fireplace. "Mom, look!" Her mother laughed. I watched them. And unexpectedly, I wasn't sad. I thought I would be, but I wasn't. Memories don't disappear when a house changes owners. They simply become memories. That evening, I packed the final box. Inside were photographs. My wife's wedding dress, Jessica's first pair of ballet shoes, a wooden toy my grandson had made. I held the box for a long time. Then I closed it. The next morning, I handed over the keys. I stood outside for a moment. Then I drove away. I didn't look back. 3 weeks later, Jessica called. Her voice sounded different. "Dad? Yes, we're struggling. I know. Mark had his hours cut. I'm sorry. The mortgage. I know." She took a breath. "Could you help us just this once?" I closed my eyes. There it was. The old pattern. The moment where the father rescues the daughter. The moment where I transfer money. The moment where the problem disappears. I could have done it. Easily. Instead, I said, "No." She became silent. "Dad, no. Please, I love you. Then help me." I shook my head. "I love you enough not to." She started crying. "I don't understand. You will." "How?" "By solving your own problem. You don't have to punish me." "I'm not punishing you." I looked out at my new porch. The mountains were covered in early morning fog. "I'm letting you become responsible for your own life." She didn't answer. Then she whispered, "I hate this. I know. I hate that you were able to walk away. I didn't walk away." I paused. I stepped back. That was the last thing I said before ending the call. My grandchildren suffered the most from the tension. I refused to let that happen. I called them every Sunday. Sometimes we talked for 5 minutes, sometimes 40. My grandson asked about the mountains. My granddaughter wanted to know if there were bears. I told them there were. She sounded horrified, then excited. I eventually invited them to stay for a week during summer. Jessica was hesitant, but she agreed. When they arrived, my grandson ran across the yard. "Grandpa." I caught him in a hug. "You got bigger." He laughed. My granddaughter pointed toward the workshop. "What's in there? You'll have to come see." For 7 days, we built things: a birdhouse, a small bench, a wooden sign. At night, we sat on the porch. I didn't talk badly about their parents. I didn't mention money. I didn't explain the argument. Children shouldn't have to carry adult conflicts. One evening, my grandson asked, "Grandpa, are you mad at Mom?" I looked at him. "No." "Then why don't you live near us?" I smiled. "Sometimes people need a little more space." He nodded. That seemed enough. It was enough for me too. Months later, Jessica came to visit alone. She sat across from me on the porch. The mountain air was cool. She looked tired, older somehow. "Dad." "Yes, I've been thinking about what you said." I didn't respond. "I called you dead weight." "Yes, I was cruel, yes." She looked down. I was scared. "Of what?" She hesitated. "Money." "That surprised me," she continued. Mark's business was struggling. The kids' expenses kept growing. I was terrified that we'd lose the house. I listened, and then I started thinking about you. I waited. About the fact that you had the house, your savings, everything. She looked ashamed. I started thinking of your future like it was something we had to plan around. I nodded. "And that was wrong." "Yes." She took a long breath. "I don't know whether you'll believe me, but I don't want your money anymore." I looked at her. "That is good," she laughed. "You don't even sound surprised." "I'm not." "Why?" "Because eventually people get tired of living with the consequences of their own choices." She smiled slightly. "Can I ask you something?" "What?" "Did you really sell the house because of what I said?" "I thought about it." "No." She looked surprised. "I sold it because your words forced me to see something I had ignored." "What?" "I had spent my whole life preparing to be useful to everyone." I looked at my hands. I never prepared to be useful to myself. She was quiet, then she cried. This time I reached across the table. She took my hand. We sat there together. No argument, no money, no expectations. just father and daughter. For the first time in a long time, people sometimes ask me whether I regret selling my house. I don't. I regret spending years believing that helping my children was the same as loving them. It wasn't. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it wasn't. There is a difference between helping someone and making their responsibilities disappear. I finally learned that difference. I still help Jessica occasionally. But now there are conditions, she asks. I decide, and if I say no, she accepts it. That boundary saved our relationship, not the money, not the house, the boundary. I also changed my will, not to punish her, not to make her suffer. I left money for my grandchildren. I left something for Jessica. I even left something for Mark. But I also left a significant portion to organizations that had helped people after the kind of medical crisis that had frightened my family. That decision made sense to me. My money should reflect my values, not my children's expectations. The night Jessica called me dead weight, I went home feeling like an old man who had finally become inconvenient. The next morning, I woke up and realized something very different. I wasn't dead weight. I was simply carrying things that were no longer mine to carry. My daughter's mortgage, her financial worries, her guilt, her expectations, her fear of the future, those belonged to her. And when I put them down, I didn't lose my daughter. I found the relationship that had been buried under all that responsibility. Today, I live in a small house in the mountains. I cook for myself. I work in my workshop. I take my grandchildren fishing. I walk every morning, and when my daughter calls, I answer because I want to. Not because I feel obligated, not because she needs money, not because I am afraid that saying no will make her stop loving me. I finally learned something my wife once understood better than I did. Love isn't proved by how much weight you can carry. Sometimes love means knowing exactly what to put down, and when my daughter called me dead weight, she thought she was telling me what I had become. She was actually giving me the courage to become someone else, someone who no longer measured his worth by what he could provide, someone who could say no without guilt, someone who could love his children without financing their lives. And most importantly, someone who finally understood that getting older does not mean becoming less valuable. It means you finally get to decide what your time, your money, and your life are worth. And that was the decision my daughter never expected me to make. There was one part of the story I never told Jessica. At least, not until much later. The money I stopped giving her wasn't the most important thing I had stopped. It was my need to be needed. For years, I had confused those two things. When Jessica called because her car needed repairs, I paid. When Mark needed help with a business expense, I paid. When the grandchildren needed something, I paid. Every time I solved a problem, I felt useful. And every time I felt useful, I felt needed. I didn't realize how dangerous that could become. Because once your identity is built around being the person who fixes everything, you eventually become frightened when nobody needs fixing. You start creating your own reasons to be involved. I was guilty of that. I didn't know it then. I knew it after I moved. The first few weeks in my new house were strangely difficult. Nobody called asking me to solve anything. Nobody needed a last-minute favor. Nobody asked me to review a bill. My phone became quiet. At first, I thought I had won. Then I realized I had lost a habit. I had spent decades being busy with other people's problems. Now, I had to sit with my own life. That was harder than I expected. One afternoon, I walked into my workshop and noticed the unfinished bookshelf I had started months earlier. Before the argument with Jessica, I would have abandoned it because someone needed me. Now there was nobody to interrupt me, so I finished it. It took 3 days. When I finally stood back and looked at it, I laughed. It wasn't perfect. One shelf was slightly crooked. The stain was darker than I wanted. But I had made it, for myself. That small bookshelf taught me something. A life doesn't become meaningful only because someone else benefits from it. Sometimes you can build something simply because you enjoy building it. That was a new idea for me, and once I understood it, I started doing more. I planted vegetables. I repaired old furniture. I joined a local walking group. I even took a photography class. I was 67 years old and taking a photography class. My wife would have found that hilarious. She used to tell me, "You spend your whole life waiting for retirement, and then you'll have no idea what to do with yourself." She had been right, but I was finally learning. Nearly a year after that first dinner, Jessica invited me to her house. "For dinner," she said. "Just dinner, yes." I smiled. "Should I be worried?" She laughed. "No." When I arrived, Mark opened the door. "Hey, Robert." "Hey." Things felt different, not perfect, but different. There was no awkward discussion about money, no comments about my house, no questions about investments. We ate together. My grandchildren talked endlessly about school. After dinner, Jessica asked me to stay behind. Mark took the children upstairs. Jessica sat across from me. "I've been thinking about that night," she said. "I know. I mean really thinking about it." I nodded. She looked nervous. "I want to apologize." "You already did." "I know." She shook her head. "Not properly." She took a breath. "I called you dead weight because I was overwhelmed." I listened, but that doesn't excuse it. "No. I was looking at everything you did for us and somehow started believing it was normal." I nodded slowly. "That happens easily," she continued. "Then when you stopped, I realized how much we had built our lives around your help." She looked embarrassed. "We weren't prepared." "For what?" "To stand on our own." There was no anger in her voice, only honesty. I smiled slightly. "That's not entirely your fault." She looked at me. "What do you mean?" "I taught you that I would always solve things." She frowned. "Dad." "No, listen." I leaned back. "I meant well. I know, but I made myself necessary." She was quiet. I thought that was love. She wiped her eyes. "It was. Not always." She shook her head. "No. Sometimes it was fear." I looked at her. "That answer surprised me," she continued. "You were afraid we'd struggle, yes, and we were afraid we'd fail." "Yes, so we created a system where nobody had to learn." I smiled. "Exactly." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Jessica laughed. "That is probably the strangest healthy conversation we've ever had." I laughed too. Maybe that was the real victory. Not that my daughter had suffered. Not that I had sold my house. Not that I had stopped funding her. It was that we could finally talk without money sitting between us. Things changed slowly after that. Jessica and Mark adjusted their finances. They sold a second car. They moved some expenses. Mark took on additional work. Jessica cut back on things she admitted they never really needed. It wasn't easy, but they survived. And more importantly, they learned that surviving without me didn't mean I had abandoned them. I still helped with the grandchildren. I paid for their school trips sometimes. I bought birthday gifts. I contributed to their college accounts. But the money went directly into accounts for the children. Not through Jessica, not through Mark, not mixed into their household finances. That decision turned out to matter more than I expected, because it removed confusion. When I helped my grandchildren, it was because I wanted to. When Jessica handled her own bills, she knew they were hers. There was no resentment, no scorekeeping, no hidden expectation. I also started talking more openly with Jessica about money, not my exact balances, not every investment, just financial responsibility, things I should have taught her when she was 25. How to build an emergency fund, how to separate wants from needs, how to prepare for unexpected expenses, how to avoid becoming dependent on one person's income. She listened. Sometimes she disagreed. That was okay. Our relationship had become adult to adult. That was something I had never realized we were missing. I had always been her father. I had never really learned how to be the father of a grown woman. One night, almost 2 years after that dinner, my phone rang at 2:14 in the morning. I sat up immediately. My heart was racing. It was Jessica. "Dad, what happened?" "It's the baby. My granddaughter was sick. They were at the hospital. I was dressed in 5 minutes. I drove through the night. When I arrived, Jessica was sitting in a hospital chair, crying. She stood up when she saw me. "Dad." I hugged her. This time, there was no question in my mind. This was what being needed was supposed to feel like. Not financial, not obligation, not fear, just family. Her daughter was okay. A bad infection, a few nights of observation, nothing permanent. But those hours in the hospital changed something in me. At one point, Jessica leaned against my shoulder. "I'm glad you're here." I smiled. "Me too." She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask me to solve anything. She simply wanted her father nearby. And for the first time, I understood that this was what I had been searching for all those years. Not being useful, being present. There is a difference, a very important one. If I could go back 20 years, I wouldn't tell myself to love my daughter less. I'd tell myself to love her differently. I would still pay for college. I would still help when she genuinely needed it. I would still show up for school plays, birthdays, hospital visits, and difficult days. But I would also say no. I would let her solve problems. I would let her make mistakes. I would let her experience consequences. Because a child who never struggles doesn't automatically become grateful. Sometimes they become dependent. And sometimes the parent who keeps rescuing them becomes resentful without realizing it. I was heading in that direction. Jessica was heading in another. Our argument stopped both of us, painful as it was. I'm grateful for that, because sometimes one cruel sentence exposes something that years of polite conversation never could. "You're becoming dead weight." At the time I heard, "You don't matter anymore." Eventually, I understood it differently. I heard, "You have built a life around carrying people who should be carrying themselves." That was the truth I needed. My grandchildren are older now. They know the story in a simplified form. They know Grandpa moved. They know I had an argument with their mother. They know I helped them financially. And they know I believe people should learn to stand on their own. One afternoon, my grandson asked me, "Grandpa, are you rich?" I laughed. "Why? Mom says you were always good with money." I thought about it. "No," he frowned. "You're not. I was good at saving money. Isn't that the same?" "No." I smiled. "Being rich is having more than you need." He waited. "Being secure is knowing you'll be okay, even when life changes." He thought about that. "Which one are you?" I looked toward the mountains. "Secure." He nodded. Then he asked, "Can I inherit your workshop?" I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. "Absolutely not." "Why? Because you'll have to build your own." He grinned. "Fair." And that was exactly what I wanted him to learn. Not that family owes you something. Not that parents owe children a comfortable life. Not that money equals love. I wanted him to understand that independence is not loneliness. It is freedom. I never told Jessica this until recently. The phrase stayed with me, not because it wounded me forever, because it changed me. There was a time when I heard dead weight and thought, "I'm becoming useless." Now I hear it differently. I think, what am I carrying that I don't need to carry anymore? Sometimes the answer is financial responsibility. Sometimes it's guilt. Sometimes it's an old expectation. Sometimes it's the belief that being a good parent means constantly sacrificing yourself. I put down all of those things, and when I did, I discovered that my life wasn't empty. It was waiting for me to notice it. The house I sold wasn't my life. The money I stopped giving wasn't my love. The distance between my daughter and me wasn't the end of our relationship. It was the space where a healthier relationship could finally grow. Jessica still calls me. Sometimes she asks for advice. Sometimes she just wants to talk. Sometimes she tells me the kids are driving her crazy. And sometimes I laugh and say, "Welcome to parenting." But when she asks for help now, she doesn't assume. She asks, I decide. That is the difference. And strangely enough, our relationship is closer now than it was before the dinner that nearly destroyed it. Because now, when my daughter says she loves me, I know she isn't saying it because I paid a bill. She's saying it because I'm her father. And when I tell her I love her, I don't feel the need to prove it with money. I just say it and mean it. People sometimes focus on the decision I made the morning after that dinner. They think the decision was to stop giving my daughter money. It wasn't. That was only the practical part. The real decision was this. I decided that the rest of my life would not be organized around making other people comfortable. I would still be generous. I would still be a father. I would still be a grandfather. But I would also be Robert, a man with plans, a man with interests, a man with a future, a man who deserved to enjoy the years he had left. That morning, I thought I was reacting to an insult. I wasn't. I was correcting a mistake I had been making for decades. And perhaps that is why the decision changed everything. My daughter didn't expect me to stop paying. She certainly didn't expect me to sell the house. She didn't expect me to move. But most of all, she didn't expect me to stop defining my worth by how much I could do for her. Neither did I. And yet that became the best decision I ever made, because I discovered something at 67 that I wish I had understood at 40. You can love your children deeply without carrying their entire lives. You can help without rescuing. You can give without becoming responsible for what they do with it. And you can say no without becoming a bad father. Sometimes, saying no is the most honest form of love a parent can offer. My daughter called me dead weight at dinner. The next morning, I didn't argue. I didn't demand an apology. I didn't threaten her. I simply put down the weight I had been carrying for years, and once my hands were free, I finally had enough strength left to carry something else, my own life. If this story made you think about the difference between loving your family and carrying their responsibilities, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to step back from someone you loved just to protect your own peace? And if you enjoyed this story, like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more emotional family stories about betrayal, boundaries, consequences, and second chances.